And so there's something to be said around making the decision right, or at least at minimum, like learning after the decision and being agile and understanding that you're going to learn more after a decision is made rather than in the process of anticipating a decision in the future for too long. And, I remember learning this lesson in high school, part of this space settlement design competition. And basically, we had some mentors. And one time when I was leading that effort, the mentors really emphasized, they're like, make a decision fast, and learn from it after the fact.
But so many people go way past that point. And after that, you're just losing like hours or days or sometimes months or years trying to make a particular decision when you could have been actually taking action on it. So that's my main thing. That's why I think decision making is so important, and getting faster at it and better at it is important, because you're just saving time and you're getting a lot of like mental space back as well.
Yeah, no, that's super relatable. I'm thinking about certain decisions as you were talking about. I was just like, the different things are popping up in my mind. I was like, yeah, I've spent a lot of time agonizing over a decision.
You can go off and take action, but it's kind of goes back to what I was saying at the top of the call, of just like the amount of time people spend wondering and thinking and debating. And I just want to clear all that away. Like, let's just get this decision made and move on with your life. And I promise your life will be better than if you took more time and more discussion and more thinking.
Yeah, and you've started to allude to this a little bit, where you mentioned people when they're in a decision, they're feeling a certain amount of anxiety or a certain amount of maybe clouded thinking. But I was curious if you could characterize, what is it that makes people struggle to make decisions?
I always say that the decision-making business is really the regret minimization business, because people are terrified of feeling regret. They're terrified of making like the wrong choice, of going down a path that's going to make them unhappy, of looking back and thinking, oh, I wish I'd done that other thing. If you're coming to me to ask, like, should I have a baby? Like, okay, if you decide to have a baby, you're giving up a lot of things that you love. If you decide not to have a baby, you're giving up a lot of things you think you're going to love. Like, there's no path that is free from regret. And so that can feel a little depressing, actually, but I think of it as kind of liberating, because once you know that you're going to feel some regret and feel some pain, like, okay, it's going to happen anyway. So like, what's the best path forward? It becomes a little easier to see that. But for me, that is absolutely what people get bogged down in, is like, they're so nervous about making the right decision and not having to feel that regret that they just can't move forward in any direction, which I promise you is worse than regret.
Let's dive into then some of these tools, which I think you're alluding to some already, but people are coming to you with a big decision, whether to have a baby. You threw that one out there. And one of the things is minimizing regret. But when you're working with someone, you're I guess you guys meet for a couple hours or whatever it is. Where do we start? What do we need to be thinking about when we're making a big decision ourselves? Where do we start to get onto a track to getting to a good outcome?
Sure. Well, first of all, I should also say that I deal with decisions that are much smaller than that. I never set the alarm clock in the morning. Like, that is super important to me. I've arranged my entire life around that. So really anything goes on this list. So you make the list of values of things that are important to you in your everyday life. And then the second exercise is to cast your mind forward as best you can into the future and write out what you would like your ideal life to look like in 1 year, in 5 years, and in 10 years. I will say up front that people hate doing this exercise, that they really struggle with it. And I get that. I also did. Like, it is really hard to imagine what you want your life to look like in the future. But both these things together can be super helpful when it comes to making a decision. I could talk a little bit about why, if you'd like. Actually, the decision should be like, when do I start my business? How do I start my side hustle? When do I go out and get clients? Not like, should I take this other job that is just going to delay me from getting what I want? It just puts all your decisions into perspective in terms of like, is this in line with my long-term goals? Are these two choices in front of me? Which one is going to get me where I want to be? And I love if people can draw a straight line to where they want to be from one of the choices that they are deciding between. I'm not talking about a wavy, long line full of lateral moves and ifs or whatever. I'm talking about like, what are the choices in front of you will get you to the future that you want faster than the other? That's probably the one that you should do.
So I'm kind of curious. I think it'd be awesome, Rahul, if you're up for it, to kind of apply and think, let's try to apply this into maybe what color you should paint your kitchen, or another decision you're facing. But really quick, one question before we do that now is, you mentioned getting there faster. And so this kind of goes back, maybe we'll talk more about this later, but I think it goes back to kind of the spiritual framing that I introduced at the start of the show.
I have found that it is almost always better to take some kind of action. Later you can pivot. My favorite expression is, you can always change your mind. But you just get so much more to work with once you like take action and start moving forward.
All right. Well, I think that's a good segue. I feel like there are a couple of examples that I'd love to run through with you now. And the reason I mentioned a couple is I think we'd love to do one that's very mundane, and then one that might feel maybe a little bit bigger than that, and then potentially an even bigger one. So you mentioned this idea of painting the kitchen, and I was raising my hand when you were talking about that, because my wife and I, we recently moved into a home in May, and we have a couple of rooms, right, that we've been wanting to paint. And I think at this point we're getting close.
They've gotten themselves into like a spiral of like, should we do this? But what about that? Should we do this? What about that? And it just becomes kind of like a self-reinforcing habit. The second suggestion I would have would be to do what I think you've already started doing, which is test those colors out. Put some of those colors on the wall. You don't have to paint the entire room to know if it's right or not. Paint a small part of it, test it out, and then you'll have much more information. And this is, I think, something that people can apply to almost any decision that they are trying to make. Test it out, even in a small way, because the way we make good decisions is not by doing what you're doing right now, Rahul, which is like sitting at home and wondering if you're going to like this or that. It's by doing the thing. And then even if you do it like just a little bit, or you just put a little bit of the color, or you just like try a little bit of a new hobby or a new, side hustle or something, all of a sudden you have real tangible data on whether or not you like the thing. If you do, great, double down, paint the whole room. If not, okay, that's useful information, pivot, you try something else. But like, test those things out as much as possible, not just paint, but like almost every decision you're trying to make, test it out. And then you have real information that you can use instead of just like more wondering. You know what I mean?
So if I could just interject here, one thing, so in your first response now, it was kind of like, again, with this kind of faster theme, right? It's like, well, just make the decision, right? Because you want to save the time. It makes me think about SMART goals, or having time-bound goals. And that's the T in SMART when we think about making goals. So is it important? I would imagine so, based on what you're saying. It's like, give yourself a deadline or a time frame, like put that paint on the wall, or like you're making this choice by Friday at 3, something like that. If you can't make it in this moment right away, it certainly can't go on till next week.
I also think for a lot of people, it can be helpful to shift the time frame, like to think like, oh, 2023 is going to be the year of this. Like that can be a lot. Like sometimes it is too much to look in the face, and therefore just scale it back. Like, what do you want to do in the next week? What do you want to do in the next month? I'm a very big fan also of like seasons, like when you feel really caught between something like, oh, I want to be spending time building my community and connecting to people close to me, but also focused on my career. Like work-life balance doesn't have to mean like all the stuff is happening at the same time. Sometimes you can work more and then you have more life later. Like it doesn't have to be every day or every week the same thing. So I like the idea of, taking these two goals, maybe that you had, these two particular ones, and deciding, okay, like January is going to be focused on work. So you know that like every day morning in January, you wake up, it's work. Like that's your priority for the day. February is going to be community or connection. So in February when you're like, what should I work on now? You're like, oh, the theme for February is connection. So I dedicate myself to connection. Like you can expand or shrink the time frame as necessary to like the point at which you are comfortable, because it can be really difficult to think about like the whole year's worth of goals or the whole year's worth of plans. Let's say like making decisions in advance is a tool that everybody can add to like their toolkit, and it can just help you so much. Like that idea of waking up every day and being like, what am I going to work on today? Like, what was I thinking about? Like, no, absolutely not. Decide at the beginning of the week or the beginning of the month or whatever.
One of the things I hear in Rahul's story here is the conflict of values. And I love what you said, Nell, of like, well, they're both your values. So just, whichever one you're working on, split it up. But I do think that there are decisions. I hope you can help us. Maybe there's a better way to understand this. I'm sure there is. But the way I currently think about it, there are certain decisions that come around sometimes that really put our values into conflict with one another.
But really, it comes down to like what that person wants to do, like in their gut. They don't think it has to do with that. They write out pros and cons lists. They make long, agonizing arguments, but it almost always comes down to that.
Okay, so that's a really interesting place to get to, and I'd love to get your take on that. You just mentioned gut, deep feeling, intuition. We started out with our values, our flow charts, our worksheets.
Yeah.
And now we get down to this deeper layer, and I'm curious, like, if you could share just what is your perspective on that? So we have some deep gut feeling, we have some intuition. You've said that as much. What do we do with that? Should we always be following that? Everyone here on this call is a coach. I know there's plenty of coaches out there that will tell you always should just be following your gut instinct or your intuition. Is that your perspective? Are there things we have to look out for there? Do we need to differentiate between different kinds of impulses and instincts that we might feel? How do we make sense of this deeper layer of life that feels so important and kind of more closely connected to who we really are?
I think gut and like instinct can sort of be code words sometimes for like, I'm just gonna do what I feel like doing and like, forget all y'all. Like it can be sort of like, oh, I'm following my gut, I'm following my instinct. That can lead to like hurting a lot of people. It can lead to like making big changes that might not serve you in the long run.
If I'm tracking that correctly now, it's that emotion or intuition is maybe a gateway to more information, is what I heard. That hey, you're having this feeling, but okay, let's examine the feeling and see what's underlying it. And there might be a point where you keep going down and there's nothing underneath it, right? And that might be the core desire. You're saying people do what they want. It might be that you're like, hey, like this is just what I want, and there's nothing underlying it. That's it, and that's kind of what ends up shining through anyway, is what I'm hearing. Does that all sound about right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're really good at distilling my long diatribes into much shorter sentences, so I appreciate that. But yeah, that's essentially what it is. And just like, it's always worth pushing back on instinct. Just to, like, not that it's bad to go with your instinct, not that instinct is necessarily leading you to a bad decision, but like, let's figure out, like, let's put a name on that actual thing. Let's keep digging. For sure. So
one other piece, Rahul, I don't know if you have something you want to go here with, but okay, people do what they want. That's, I think we're kind of centering on that too as something that is generally speaking healthy. What you're saying now is like connect with what it is that you want to do and do it. When we get into, I guess, especially social living, right? We want to do something. This is like the birth of politics, the birth of family dynamics. It gets complicated. We want to do one thing, other people want us to do something else. Sometimes talk about morals or religions. We have some people think about we have certain things we want to do, but there's like higher values that we should be aspiring to. How does any of that? I know that's not necessarily the vantage point you're coming from, but do we need to look out for or check what it is that we want?
I'm not saying everyone should just do what they want all the time. Absolutely not. I'm just saying that when people come to me with a decision, like in almost any sphere, like job choice, career change, moving abroad, having a kid or whatever, like in those situations, they've already examined them and like neither choice is going to cause a lot of harm. No one is calling me and be like, well, like I have this addiction and should I indulge it or not? Like, it's like, that is not what people call a decision coach for. And certainly people are usually too thoughtful about their decisions. When we're talking about just like doing what you want all the time, like those people are not questioning their decisions. They are not agonizing over their decisions. They are not spending time making those decisions.
If you choose one direction A, you can bring value B into the direction A route as well. And it's maybe a more, you just have to figure out how to do that. Question that I'm thinking about here is, again, my mind is going to like the flow charts and all that. And I'm like, yeah, as we're talking about it, this all like makes sense, right? It all seems to be logical enough. And I'm like still noodling on that early question that we talked about, which is like, so what happens then, right? When we're in the process of making a decision, how do we lose sight of this? And what is it that, so I guess the question is like, what is it that can like help with the mindset, right? Our mindset of staying grounded in these decision-making principles that we've been talking about.
First of all, I should say that I'm a little bit allergic to the word mindset. Like, you better be sure that by the time we get off the phone, you have scheduled like, your next pickleball tournament in that city, and you have set up 3 different coffee dates with people to meet people. Like, you have to do the thing that you're actually going for. You have to like live out those reasons. And that is how you can make almost any decision a success, honestly. It's not quite a secret, but it's a little bit of a secret.
Just on that note of carrying things out, we had this question. It's maybe a little bit of a non sequitur, but I think about what happens if you're unable to carry your decision out, or the circumstances beyond you make it so that, I don't know, you're not able to move to that city and schedule the pickleball thing, or you don't get to live in the van or whatever it is. I mean, some of those might feel like far-fetched. Like I'm imagining like people who are in prison or something like that, or displaced or something like that. But I think we're always kind of, I think in a more common sense, confronted with this idea of maybe not getting what we want.
Or buyer's remorse, you make a decision. Maybe it's something that's a little bit less reversible than like a paint color. Maybe you buy a house and you're like, hey, I'm going to commit to living in a place for a few years. And then you're like, I don't know, is this right? Is this not right? And you're, and what's coming to me is like, hey, one, it's probably still reversible if it's really that bad, to increase the likelihood that you actually follow through on those reasons. Because I think what often can happen is after you make the decision, you get caught in the tide of something or the other, and then you might go back to your decision making.
What is going to work out better for her? Because for all of us, for all my clients, for all the people listening, like the best thing you can do for your future self is to give them as many options as possible. Now, for people who are indecisive, many options can sound like a horrible thing. They don't want more options. They don't want whatever. But anything you can do to set your future self up for, like, I would suggest take the amount of time you think you need to make the decision, whether that's like a week or a month or 6 months, and cut it in half. Honestly, I would say like cut it down to 10% of the time you think you would need, but people freak out when they hear that. So I'm going to say, take the time. If you think you need a month to make a decision, give yourself 2 weeks. If you think you need 6 months to make a decision, give yourself 3 months. And I can promise you that the quality of the decision will not be affected, and you will get those 3 months of your life back. That most people, they spend, like I said, I cannot say this enough, people spend way too much time making decisions, and there's a point at which like there's no new information is coming in. Sure, do your research, make your pros and cons list, think your decision through, talk it through with some people if that's helpful to you.